Introduction. New York, a state which is located in that northeastern part of US, is highly known for its population. According to the estimates being counted in 2015, it is noticed that there were a total of 19.8 million residents at that time of year. This is at most referred by the name of New York State, which makes it easy for people to discriminate it from New York City. History of this state actually took a flight when some of the inherent Americans reached at the place, which is in 10,000 BC. By the time of 1100 AD, those very well known of the inherent cultures of New York, named as Iroquoian and Algonquian, got their roots established. It is believed that very first of the European detection in the state of New York was actually controlled by French in the year of 1524, and then moving along the very first claim about land was made by Dutch in 1609. Colony was considered as that important part in fur occupation as being the part of New Netherland, and which made it ultimately become that major resource for agriculture for whom the major thanks goes to the patroon system. Then in the year of 1626, Dutch people managed to bring the landmass of Manhattan from hands of Native Americans, also during the time of 1664, after that Duke of York, which was later known by the name of James II and VII, England decided to get the colony renamed to New York. Moving over in 18th century, New York City finally managed to gain its importance in the form of that major exchange harbour in mid of all of the 13 colonies. New York is also known for playing that major and essential role while American Revolution and succeeding war were completely in action. Later, in the year 1765, the Stamp Act Congress was brought in action, which made it easier for different governments from all over the 13 colonies to get together and thus came out with that united reaction for British policies. Also, during this time, there was that complete authority of Sons of Liberty maintained in the city of New York so as to encounter the authority of British people. After getting experienced that major amount of loss in the War of Long Island, there were so many of those additional defeats that were being grieved by the Continental Army, which anyhow managed to force a departure from the area of the city of New York, and that too by leaving behind the tactical port and harbour back for the convenience of British Army and Navy, so that they can use it as their base of operations for the war, which is still left to come at the end. Battle of Saratoga was one of those battles which can be considered as that huge turning point, and that too in courtesy of the American people, which convinced France to officially get in support with them. It was about 1777 when Constitution of New York was actually brought in light, and then which also powerfully inclined the Constitution of United States. New York City was also considered as that nationwide capital for many of the times between the eras of 1785 and 1790, where Bill of Rights is said to be enlisted. New York is also being counted in the names of states which are believed to host substantial transportation progressions during the time of 19th century. That includes the very first steamboat line, which was launched by the year of 1807. Then comes Erie Canal, launched by the year 1825, and also that first frequently planned rail service of American that was launched in 1831. These were some of the well-known progressions which, as a result, headed to the extended settlement of New York in West and trade bonds to the settlements in Midwest all around those Great Lakes. There were many of those Southern supporters during those initial days of American Civil War, and also there were the major planned separation, behind which the main reason was New York City's binds to the southern part. New York at that time was not under the influence of any of the foreign community or battles, which made them to help out the Union cause by sending over the maximum amount of men and money. Subsequently, this state of New York helped them in creating the manufacturing age, which therefore made it to be the home for many of the first labour mergers. It is about that late 19th century when New York City was specifically considered as that chief entrance point for the migrants who are going towards the United States from Europe, behind which the major cause was the condition of starvation which made many of the Irish people to move from that place. There were those continuous amounts of migrants adding up in the state in search of some support and shelter. Millions of people got already added in the Battery Park through Castle Clinton when Ellis decided to open up the island in the year of 1892 so as to get millions of more added to the community progressively from different parts of the Europe, no matter whether it be east or west. You know, New York is famous for its statue, the Statue of Liberty, which was actually established in the year of 1886 and is entirely considered as the symbol of hope. It was during the time of thriving 20s when New York actually boomed through and made its name, that is before the Wall Street crash, which took place in the year of 1929, when those skyscrapers used to express the energy and liveliness of the city. It is believed that from the year of 1913 to 74, New York City was actually considered as the location where one can have a look to one of the tallest buildings all over the world. The major fall down in terms of economy in this city was actually found to be noticed when there was that huge build-up of defense industries carried out for the purpose of World War II, and that too because there were hundreds of thousands of people who worked out to overthrow the Axis influences. Also, in addition to this loss at the time of war, there was also that major suburbanization experienced by all of the major cities on the state, which also made many of the central cities get shrink. Moving along, during the time of 1956, there was that expressway system opened up, which was actually a direct signal to the beginning of another era in the field of transportation. During the time of 1970s, when an incident about bankruptcy was being noticed in this state, there is that great renewing in the figure of New York, which made it get shaped into traditional centre that fascinated more of the arrival, and also introduced the expansion of some new music races. The city developed from publishing to become a media capital over the second half of the 20th century, hosting most national news channels and broadcasts. The rise in the country also made its newspapers to become known by many of the people not only nationally but also globally. Manufacturing base of this state actually got eroded with the activities where industry has been restricted, also which made the state to get transitioned among many of those service industries. After that, in 2001, there was the biggest terrorist attack which took place in the soil of whole of the United States, and thus made the World Trade Center, killing almost 3,000 number of people in the tragedy. Chapter 1. Prehistory of New York. Now, reading above, you must be already knowing about the boundary line of the history of New York, and before going any step forward to learn this in brief, it is important that you get a knowledge about prehistory of that same state, which is going to make you learn about how actually the New York's history came into existence. It is about 10,000 BC when the very first people in New York are believed to have arrived. Then moving forward, during the time of around 800 AD, when many of the Iroquois families relocated to the area from the area of Appalachian, the people of Point Peninsula complex are considered to be the ancestors of Algonquian people who were living in New York. By the time of 1100, many of those different Iroquoian and Algonquian-speaking philosophies that are in any way going to get faced by Europeans got developed in that area. 5 of the famous countries of Iroquois Association managed to develop a powerful union around the time of 15th century, which is believed to be the major controller there even through the present-day New York into the area of Pennsylvania, anywhere around Great Lakes. It is believed that Mohawk refined the fields of maize under the plains of Mohawk River for a really long period of time, which was in future occupied by Dutch colonizers at the place of Schenectady, New York, when they purchased this region. The Iroquois people at the west side also had cultivated parts and plantations. Moreover, in addition to that, Iroquois also managed to get their supremacy established all over the craft related to fur in whole of their region, and that too while brokering with European migrants. Whereas, on the other side, there were also the other communities from New York who were at the most focused of either the European devastation or getting accommodation within the Union of Iroquoian people. During this time, the Iroquois were also said to be forcefully trapped with a huge amount of European people, which also can indicate that many of the migrants from different regions, such as Dutch, French or English, were brought up to the Iroquois so that they can make their living. That is all because of Iroquois being located in the mid of major linking routes in the northeast direction and also in mid of French and English zones. On the other hand, talking about those Algonquian communities, it is noticed that they were not that better unified among their societies, as they usually were seen to be living along the areas like rivers, streams, or the Atlantic coast. But even after looking over all of the reports, it has been said that both of these groups of communities were actually one of those well-established pioneers with extremely refined cultural systems, though European colonists were still not on that mark to understand and appreciate them and their work. The people who belong to these communities had their native economy being elaborated in the activities like shooting, gathering, manufacturing and farming, and which also made them to be considered as a mixture of instinctive American communities, states, languages, and also the administrative associations. The people from Iroquois normally used to meet in the north part of New York at Onondaga, which actually brought a very huge transformation in every period or so. There, these people used to synchronize strategies on how can it may be possible to deal with Europeans and get their connection bound between all the 5 nations. Moving over to the colonial period, it is being said that during the year of 1524, an explorer from Italy named as Giovanni de Verrazzano, who was at most of the time in provision of the French crown, managed to discover also the Atlantic coastline in North America, which was said to be situated in mid of the Carolinas and Newfoundland, which did not really end there, as it also comprised of New York Port and Narragansett Bay. It is also believed that during the year of 1524, on April 17th, Verrazzano crossed into the area of New York Bay by the way of a strait which is now known to people by the name of Narrows. According to his description, it was a huge seashore with a profound outlet which can actually make it possible for every kind of ship to easily pass through, and also in addition to that, he said, it outspreads inland for a league and thus releases up to form that beautiful kind of lake. This wide sheet of water is filled up with native boats. It is said that he actually landed to that slope of Manhattan, and which can also be said as the uttermost point of huge Long Island. Also during the year of 1535, another explorer, but from France, named as Jacques Cartier, became that first ever European to define and plot another river from the corners of Atlantic Ocean, and this river was named as the St. Lawrence River. While looking over to the history of colonial period from under the British and Dutch people, it can be noticed that during the era of 1609 on April the 4th, one of the employees of Dutch East India Company, named as Henry Hudson, left Amsterdam behind when he got commanded by the ship Half Moon, also known by the name of Half Moon. Then, moving over at the time of September the 3rd, he managed to reach the inlet of Hudson River, from where he navigated up from the Hudson River towards the part of Albany. This journey of him was afterwards being used to present Dutch assertions to the region and also to the fur profession, which is believed to get flourished there after the time when dealing post was already recognized at Albany during the time of 1614. Also during this time of 1614, the Dutch community, being under the appreciation of Hendrik Christiansen, constructed over the Fort Nassau, which is now known as Albany, that is also considered as the very first Dutch expenditure in the area of North America. Although, later on, in the year of 1623, it got substituted by neighbouring Fort Orange, which is now located in the area of New Netherland. This New Netherland in 1664 was then conquered by the English people, the terms behind which were actually being decided to kept minimum by the community in local. After this, the society and the city, they both got retitled to the New York, following which the Beverwyck also get retitled and thus became Albany, And all this happened after the new elected manager, who was also named as James II of England and was also the Duke of York and Albany at the very same time. It is also being said that during this process of getting New Netherland taken over by the English people, the total of the population there was 7,000 to 8,000. Chapter 2. Authority of New York. Looking over the chapter above, it must be pretty clear by now that what actually gave that starting kick to the history of New York and how it has been the support system and also the victim state while getting in touch with many other countries that were to their neighbours. Now is the part where you are going to know about the province, the territory of New York, which is going to bring the another point linked with New York out to the world. So the authority of New York, which actually is believed to be lasted from the time period of 1664 to 1776, was nothing but a British head colony which had all of those present US states included within, some of which are New York, New Jersey, Delaware and Vermont, following which those internal shares of places like Massachusetts, Connecticut and Maine were also the part of same. Soon after this, the major part of this land got distributed by the head at that time, leaving behind the territories like basins of the Hudson and also Mohawk rivers and Vermont. Iroquois land, the region of west part of New York, also later got shared between many of those English colonies and New France, on the other side of which Vermont got disputed with some territory in New Hampshire. Though this province left many of the people in shock, as they do not know about why this all happened, so for the knowledge on which this was actually the result of surrender made by the community of Dutch in front of the Empire of England during the time of 1664. Soon after, when the province which had been taken over was renamed for the community of England, that is, James, who already was Duke of York, and also the brother of Charles II from England. This society was also used to be considered as the part of one of the middle colonies, which was being governed at very first straight from the area of England. Moving over during the time of 1775, on 22nd of May, the New York Regional Congress of Local Councils got themselves acknowledged as the government, which at first was considered as the state of New York during the time of 1776, and got approved as being the New York State Constitution during the year of 1777. Although the British people got New York City recaptured during the time of American Revolutionary War, where they used it as the armed and political base of processes in the state of North America, and also during which a British administrator was also precisely found in office, there was most of the part of Prague colony which was at the most seized by the nationalists. And then 1783 brought along the final stoppage in this process of claiming any other part of New York by introducing Treaty of Paris. Chapter 3. New York and Wars. Like any other state or country, this state here also has those war-related backgrounds, which indicates about with which this state has actually been through, and thus reached the point where it became famous among many of those other people. Talking at first, it was about the American Revolutionary War, which actually is believed to be lasted from 1775 to 1783. This war is also known as American War of Independence that brought conflicts between Great Britain and 13 of the North American societies. New York played that really important role in same. The first ever step that was taken by the group while approaching over the revolt was bringing over the Stamp Act of 1765, progressing those New York-based Sons of Freedom to the very front of the political parties in New York. This act was actually the process to make whole of the condition and stress faced by province get more worsened, and that too after being unsuccessful in the attack against Canada during the year of 1760. Though the dealers who belonged to New York City lost out on profitable military agreements, the group managed to bring out that mutual service between the one as a head and also the common people. Moving over, after some time, this negotiation became unbearable due to the battles of Lexington and Concord, which took place in April 1775. Getting through all of this, there were still two of the families which had that broad line of colony-wide supporters standing with them, and that too for a really long period of time. Association of people having limited exceptions with the Delancey group went good for a really long time when it was the time for management to upkeep the crown, which also as a result led for members of the Livingston group to become the nationalists. It was at Major, the central location and port, which brought over the New York an opportunity to become the key for controlling all of the colonies. British also managed to accumulate the century's major army, which as a result made one point to be flooded with 30,000 number of British mariners and also the militaries attached with the Staten Island. So this act by British people made many of those major communities to move out of the city, though for some it was hard to get out of there, such as General George Washington hardly left New York City, carrying his army with him during the year of November 1776. Also, on the other hand, General Sir William Howe got that major success in making Washington get out of the place, but later he was also blundered by escalating into the area of New Jersey. During the time of January 1777, he reserved only those few number of settlements near the New York City which made British to have a hold on the city for a long period of time, by using it as a base for all of those missions settled up in contradiction of other of the objectives. Though during the time of October 1777, the head general of America, Horatio Gates, got successful in winning of the conflict of Saratoga, which was after some time observed as the major turning point of war. To the Civil War. As soon as the conflict came to an end, the borders of New York got clear. The eastern part of the region of Lake Champlain turned out to become Vermont, and also the borders at west of the state were established by the time of 1786. There were many of those Iroquois people who were in support with the British people, the main reason behind which was that distinctive fear for the future of American determinations. Most of the people at the war got killed, and on the other side, the ones who were left went off into repartee with the British people. And also these remaining ones used to live under the 12 uncertainties, which by the time of 1826 got left to only 8 numbers of reservations, and so which made all of them to survive at the time of 21st century. It was about 1777 in April when this state of New York finally got to adopt its establishment, and that too by generating a strong supervisory and also the severe departure of authorities, which also got the federal constitution intensely inclined after some amount of time. There was also a discussion made over the federal structure during the time of 1787, which eventually directed to the foundation of various types of groups, which were known by the name of Federalists or primarily downstaters, the term used for those who used to live in or near the New York City, who were also being counted in the ones supporting the tough national administration, including anti-federalists, which were mostly from upstaters category, that is, the one who used to live in the north and the west part of the city. They used to oppose large general organizations. During the time of 1787, one of the chief Federalists who belonged to the city of New York, and also the participant of the Constitution named as Alexander Hamilton, wrote that very first debate for the need of Federalist papers. In addition to that, he also wrote and published many of the other series for the newspapers of New York City, which used to call upon in provision of the projected Constitution for United States. Although any of these arguments were actually effective not in any way to anti-federalists, but they were anyhow approved by the state during the time of 1788. After that, during the time period of 1785, New York City finally got considered as the nationwide capital, and the process continued, being on and off until the time period of 1790. The very first President of the United States got inaugurated during the time of 1789 in front of whole of the Federal Hall, and the person is known by the name of George Washington. This hall is also majorly known for being that very first place where the United States Bill of Rights was enlisted, and also the United States Supreme Court assembled there for the very first time. It is also being said that from that very first date of meeting to the year of 1797, the government at continuous rate relocated the capital to the state among Albany, Kingston, Poughkeepsie and New York City, which at the end resulted to being Albany as the one which finally got reserved for the same role. During the time of 19th century, New York finally got to become a center point for whole of the progression in the field of shipping or transportation. The very first steamboat line, which is also considered as one of the successful transportations, was inaugurated by Robert Fulton during the time of 1807 from the area of New York to Albany. And moving forward to 1815, Albany at that time was considered as state's turning center, which made this city of New York to get recognized as that center for innovators who were traveling towards the west, towards the Buffalo and also the Michigan terrain. It is also believed that during the first half session of 19th century, culture in New York started to bloom with a glow. Moving over during the time of 1809, a satirical was written by the Washington Irving, which was named as A History of New York, and that too under the name of Dietrich Knickerbocker. Then during 1819 he founded Rip Van Winkle and the Legend of Sleepy Hollow in the area of towns of Hudson Valley. Also by presenting an intense background to the Hudson Valley, the Thomas Coles Hudson River School got its roots recognized during the year of 1830. Following which the very first baseball team got its shape in the city of New York during the time of 1840, which also included the Knickerbockers from New York. This settlement of proficient baseball soon after that got its Hall of Fame positioned in the area of Cooperstown. The Saratoga race course, which is an annual summer appeal in Saratoga Springs, opened in 1847. About the Civil War. Being New York in solid links with the deep southern part via the seaport and also the production of cotton goods in upstate material refines, the conflicts was not that much a good awareness in terms of business. It is also said that half of the trades in New York City were only linked to cotton before any condition related to the war came into existence. Many of the manufacturers from the southern part of state were seen recurrently travelling towards the city, and thus which made them get their preferred of the hotels and cafeterias. Maximum of the employment was actually based on transforming those goods from the southern part of the city. It is also said that during that time of the year, 1860, the wide Republican community was actually afraid of the influence of Abraham Lincoln's election, and which also made the major to wish take a departure from New York. Moving over, by the time of 1861, many of the huge political differences came to an end, and which also brought many of those requests for soldiers and supplies, and the whole thing behind this was clash of Fort Sumter. There were many of those numbers of people from New York who participated in throughout the Civil War, which was actually estimated as much more than any of the other northern states. As none of the clashes were rewarded in New York, this state was not safe from any kind of associated collusions, among which one was to blister several of the cities of New York, and on the other hand, one to conquer the government via the help of Canada. During the year of January 1863, there was that Freedom Declaration issued by the Lincoln, which managed to make the slaves in states set free, which were still there standing working against the Union. Moving over during the time of March 1863, there was that huge alteration noticed in federal draft law, according to which all of those male citizens who age in mid of 20 and 35, and also the one who is 45 and still unmarried, were actually a focus for recruitment, though the one who could afford to get the substitute hired or who can pay $300 were at major excused. There were also many of those people from the community of anti-violence newspaper copyreaders who took a step forward to attack the law, and which made many of the migrants and their offspring to get recruited in place of those who could manage to make and thus purchase with their way out. Many of the leaders from Democratic Party elevated the threat of an overflow of black people from the southern part of state who were settled free to work with the other class of people and thus have that complete freedom. Moving along, they were also conquered by cultural Irish and also the migrants. According to many of those reports in history, during the time of 1863, on July 11th, the very first lottery draw took place, as this day is also known by the name of Lottery's First Day, also following which, on July the 13th, 1863, there were those many of the conflicts being noticed happening, which lasted for 5 days, which were at major controlled by the ethnic community in Irish, who targeted whole of the community of blacks in the city, including whole of their regions, and known protester supporters. As a result of which, there were many of the black people who finally decided to leave Manhattan eternally for moving over to Brooklyn and other areas of the state. Chapter 4. World War II and Modern New York. And now comes the whole of the discussion about World War II and how whole of the New York managed through everything to reach the point in modern era. Like many other wars in the region, this time also New York played that role of being the largest state and thus managed to deliver most of the possessions during the time of World War II. There were around 11% of the total army weapons produced by New York during the time of war, and thus which made it easy to suffer and made 31,215 number of losses. This war actually produced that huge effect on social and economic condition of the state. For instance, a committee named as Committee on Discrimination in Employment was created during the time of 1941 by the Governor Herbert H. Lehmanto, overcome intolerant work practices, and on the other side, an Ives Quinn bill was signed by the Governor Thomas E. Dewey in 1945 so as to ban any kind of discrimination in terms of employment. There was that GI Bill introduced in 1944, which offered many of the recurring militaries the occasion to have an access to reasonable higher education, which in turn also enforced New York to generate a public campus system, and that is because those private universities cannot really handle the inflow. So as a result of which in the year of 1948, the State University was generated in New York by Governor Dewey. At the time of World War II, it was at most the great industrial period of New York which has been counted in, at the result of which the major part of resistance business got shrank, which led most of the economy to get moved towards manufacturing facilities instead of goods. Soon after the soldiers started returning, it unreasonably got females and many of the marginal workers who had entered the manufacturing staff during the time when there was not any other option left to the employers by war get displaced. Also, there were many of the corporations which moved towards the south and west direction of states so as to pursue lower excises and also get that not so much expensive non-union staff. Many of the employers tracked the jobs and positions as obviously it was necessary for one to be able to manage in there. On the other hand, one who belonged to middle class prolonged and produced outskirts such as the ones situated on Long Island. Many of the automobiles enhanced this devolution. Scheduled societies like Levittown presented reasonable middle-class housing. Around the time of 1950, there were those many of the larger cities which stopped growing any further and got only restarted during the time of 1980 in New York itself. Also during the time of 1950 and 2000, population of Buffalo fell by half. Population in New York also went down due to the reduced rate in terms of migration and worker relocation for the very first time during the period of 1970 and 1980, which also made California and Texas to exceed in terms of population in comparison to that of New York. Moving over during the time of 20th century, there were many of those telecommunication and high-knowledge businesses who hired many of the New Yorkers so as to provide them a source of money. So basically, one can say that this time was actually a huge way of success for the New York City. Along with that, there were also any of those business persons who came out with their very own small companies as manufacturing companies such as Polaroid, Withered, and this success of the city made many of those young experts to make a visit and look up for the opportunity. New York City now times was basically becoming that exclusion which is at great level attracting more and more people and residents towards the city. There were many of those new attractions and new businesses coming in existence and thus making more and more people know about the city. Though many of the people also had that belief, according to which whole of this positive environment was due to that change in policies, as a result of which there are very much less crime rates, and also the urban growth reduced to the urban decay. Moving forward, September 2011 brought that new era in the life of New York and also the people living there. September 11th turned out to be that major turning point for this state by bringing over the worst attack by terrorists which has ever been faced by the people in there on American soil. According to the reports, it is believed that 4 of the traveller jets were hijacked and then brought over near the USA. Among these 4 jets, 2 of them got collided at the upper part of World Trade Center and thus making it get destroyed, also which killed at most of 3,000 numbers of people. On the other side, among the 2 remaining ones, one flew over to the Pentagon so as to get the walls destroyed, and another one was taken over by the navigators, and then which got crashed in some open ground which made 296 people out of all of the 500 get killed. There were many of the New Yorkers who gave most of their time to examine the destruction for survivors and also the leftovers for many of the following weeks. Conclusion. So, whole of the things described above are actually the direct references to conclude that there is a lot that New York has been through the centuries. New York has always been that support system to many of other states when they were going through the condition of conflicts with other states or countries. One can notice New York is always being the state which had many of those successful achievements that made it stand out in the crowd.